My name is Rose Martinez. I'm 73 years old, and 3 days ago, I slept in my Honda Civic in the driveway of the house I've owned for 38 years. The same house where I raised my son David, where I cared for my husband through his final illness, and where I thought I'd spend my remaining years in peace. But David and his pregnant wife Sarah decided they needed space for the baby, and that space was my entire house. When I refused to move out, David changed the locks while I was at my doctor's appointment. "Mom, this is temporary," he said through the locked door as I stood on my own front porch with my purse and medication bag. "Sarah needs a stress-free environment for the pregnancy. You can stay with Aunt Linda until after the baby comes." I had nowhere else to go. Aunt Linda lived in a nursing home, my other relatives were across the country, and my savings had been depleted helping David through various financial crises over the years. So I slept in my car for 3 nights, using the gas station bathroom, buying food from vending machines, and wondering how my own son could treat me like a homeless stranger. If you've ever been locked out of your own home by your own family, stay with me. Let me tell you who I am before I tell you what my son did to me. My name is Rose Martinez. I'm 73 years old, and 3 days ago I slept in my Honda Civic in the driveway of the house I've owned for 38 years. The same house where I raised my son David, where I cared for my husband through his final illness, and where I thought I'd spend my remaining years in peace. But David and his pregnant wife Sarah decided they needed the space for the baby, and that space was my entire house. When I refused to move out, David changed the locks while I was at my doctor's appointment. "Mom, this is temporary," he said through the locked door as I stood on my own front porch with my purse and medication bag. "Sarah needs a stress-free environment for the pregnancy. You can stay with Aunt Linda until after the baby comes." I had nowhere else to go. Aunt Linda lived in a nursing home, my other relatives were across the country, and my savings had been depleted helping David through various financial crises over the years. So I slept in my car for 3 nights, using the gas station bathroom, buying food from vending machines, and wondering how my own son could treat me like a homeless stranger. If you've ever been locked out of your own home by your own family, stay with me. Let me tell you who I am before I tell you what my son did to me. My name is Rose Martinez. I'm 73 years old, and I've lived in the same house in Phoenix, Arizona for 38 years. I'm a retired school secretary, a widow of 5 years, and the mother of 1 son who I thought loved and respected me. David is 35 years old, married to Sarah for 2 years, and they've been trying to have a baby for most of their marriage. I was thrilled when they finally got pregnant 6 months ago, and I had been looking forward to being a grandmother and helping with the baby. My house is a modest 3-bedroom ranch that my husband Miguel and I bought in 1986 when David was starting elementary school. We worked hard to pay it off early, Miguel as a construction foreman and me as a school secretary, and by the time Miguel retired, we owned it free and clear. After Miguel died 5 years ago, I continued living in the house alone. It was too big for just me, but it held 40 years of memories, and I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. David lived about 20 minutes away with Sarah, and they visited regularly for family dinners and holidays. Our relationship had always been close and loving. David was a good son who called me weekly, helped with household repairs, and included me in their social activities. When he married Sarah, I welcomed her into our family and tried to build a good relationship with my new daughter-in-law. The problem started about a year ago when David and Sarah began having financial difficulties. David worked as a sales manager for a furniture store, and Sarah was a part-time dental hygienist. Their combined income was decent, but they had bought a house that was beyond their means and were struggling with the mortgage payments. "Mom, we're really tight this month," David would say when he asked me for help with their bills. "Could you lend me $1,000 just until my commission check comes in?" I was happy to help. I had Miguel's life insurance money and my pension, so I was comfortable financially. Helping my son and daughter-in-law during difficult times felt like the right thing to do. But the requests became more frequent and larger. Help with the mortgage payment, money for car repairs, funds for Sarah's medical bills when she was having fertility treatments. Each time David promised to pay me back, but the money never materialized. Over the course of a year, I gave them nearly $25,000, a significant portion of my savings. I began to worry about my own financial security, but David assured me that his career was improving and he would be able to repay everything soon. The dynamic changed dramatically when Sarah got pregnant. Instead of being grateful for my support and excited about including me in their growing family, they became demanding and critical about my involvement in their lives. "Mom, Sarah needs space to prepare for the baby," David said when I offered to help set up the nursery. "She's very particular about how things should be done." "I understand. I just want to help however I can." "The best way you can help is by giving us some distance," Sarah added. "This is a very stressful time, and I need to focus on having a healthy pregnancy." I was hurt by their rejection, but I tried to respect their wishes. I reduced my visits and phone calls, waiting for them to reach out to me instead of initiating contact myself. But the distance they wanted wasn't just emotional, it was physical. 3 months into Sarah's pregnancy, they began complaining about their house and talking about needing more space for the baby. "Our house is just too small," Sarah would say during our increasingly rare visits. "We need a bigger place, but we can't afford to move right now." "Maybe you could downsize," David suggested to me one evening. "You don't really need a 3-bedroom house anymore, and the money from selling could help you move somewhere more appropriate for a senior." "This is my home," I replied. "I'm not ready to move." "But Mom, you're getting older, and this house is a lot of work to maintain. Wouldn't it be easier to live in a senior community where everything is taken care of for you?" I suspected that David's sudden concern about my living situation was more motivated by his desire to access my home equity than by genuine worry about my well-being. The pressure intensified as Sarah's pregnancy progressed. They began making comments about how much space they needed, how expensive childcare would be, how difficult it would be to manage with a baby in their small house. "You know, Mom," David said during one visit, "it would make sense for us to move in with you temporarily, just until we can save enough money to buy a bigger place." "Move in with me?" I repeated, surprised by the suggestion. "Just for a year or two," Sarah added. "We could help with the household expenses, and you'd have family around as you get older." The idea made me uncomfortable. I had worked hard to maintain my independence after Miguel's death, and I valued my privacy and autonomy. The thought of sharing my home with 2 other adults, plus a baby, was overwhelming. "I need to think about it," I said. "Don't think too long," David replied. "Sarah's due date is getting closer, and we need to make arrangements." 2 months later, when Sarah was 7 months pregnant, they made their decision for me. "Mom, we've decided to move in with you," David announced during a phone call. "Sarah's doctor says she needs to reduce stress, and our house is just too small and chaotic for a pregnant woman." "I haven't agreed to that," I protested. "Mom, we're family," Sarah said, taking the phone. "This is what families do. They help each other during difficult times. You helped us financially, and now we need you to help us with housing." "But this is my home." "And we're not asking you to leave," David interrupted. "We're asking you to share it temporarily while we get on our feet." The conversation ended with them informing me that they would be moving in the following weekend, whether I agreed or not. They had already given notice on their rental house and had nowhere else to go. I felt trapped and manipulated. They had created a crisis that forced me to choose between helping them and maintaining my independence. And they were using Sarah's pregnancy as emotional leverage to get what they wanted. But I agreed, not wanting to cause stress for Sarah during her pregnancy or create conflict in our family. I told myself it was temporary, that they would move out after the baby came, and they had saved some money. I had no idea that they had no intention of ever leaving and that they were planning to take over my house completely. The day David and Sarah moved into my house, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. What I had expected to be a temporary arrangement with clear boundaries became an immediate takeover of my home and my life. They arrived with a moving truck full of furniture, boxes, and baby equipment, despite the fact that my house was already fully furnished. Instead of adapting to my existing space, they began rearranging everything to suit their preferences. "Mom, we need to move your dining room table to make space for our baby gear," Sarah said, directing the movers to relocate furniture I had owned for 20 years. "But where will we eat?" I asked. "We can eat in the kitchen," David replied. "The dining room needs to be a staging area for baby supplies." Within hours, my home was unrecognizable. My living room was filled with their oversized sectional sofa and entertainment center. My kitchen counters were covered with their appliances and gadgets. My garage was packed with boxes of their belongings. "This is just temporary," David kept saying as they transformed my space. "Once we get organized, we'll figure out a better arrangement." But their idea of temporary was very different from mine. They made no effort to minimize their impact on my space or my routine. Instead, they acted as if they were the primary residents and I was the guest. Sarah, who was now 8 months pregnant, spent most of her time on the couch directing David to rearrange furniture and organize baby supplies. She complained constantly about the temperature, the lighting, and the noise level in the house. "Rose, could you keep the TV down?" she would say when I was watching my evening programs. "The baby can hear sounds from inside the womb, and I don't want him exposed to violence." "Could you not run the dishwasher in the evening?" she asked another time. "The sound is too stimulating for me right now." "Would it be possible for you to park on the street?" David suggested. "Sarah has trouble walking long distances, and she needs to park close to the door." Each request seemed reasonable on its own, but together they added up to me being displaced in my own home. I was tiptoeing around my own house, trying not to disturb the pregnant woman who had taken over my living space. The financial arrangements were equally problematic. Despite their promise to help with household expenses, they contributed nothing to utilities, groceries, or maintenance costs. Instead, they seemed to expect me to absorb all the additional expenses of having 2 extra adults and a baby in the house. "Mom, we're really tight right now with all the baby expenses," David explained when I asked about their contribution to the grocery bill. "Once Sarah goes back to work after maternity leave, we'll be able to help more." But Sarah had already announced that she planned to stay home with the baby for at least a year, which meant their financial contribution would be delayed indefinitely. The situation worsened after Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Michael. Instead of the temporary arrangement becoming more manageable, it became more chaotic and demanding. The baby cried frequently, especially at night, disrupting my sleep and making it impossible for me to rest in my own home. Sarah was overwhelmed and emotional, crying often and snapping at both David and me when she felt stressed. "I can't handle this," she would sob when the baby wouldn't stop crying. "I need quiet and peace, and this house is too chaotic." "Maybe we should look for our own place," David would suggest half-heartedly. "With what money? We can't afford to move right now, and I can't handle the stress of packing and moving with a newborn." I offered to help with the baby, thinking that my experience as a mother might be useful, but Sarah rejected my assistance. "I need to bond with my baby," she said when I offered to hold Michael so she could shower. "The books say that too many caregivers can confuse infants." "I appreciate the offer, Mom, but Sarah has her own way of doing things," David added. "It's better if we handle the baby care ourselves." I was excluded from caring for my own grandson while being expected to accommodate all the disruptions his presence created in my home. 3 months after Michael was born, I finally worked up the courage to ask David and Sarah about their plans for moving out. "We need to talk about when you'll be ready to find your own place," I said during a rare moment when Sarah was napping and David was home from work. "David, I can't move right now. Sarah is still recovering from childbirth. Michael is too young to be disrupted by a move, and we haven't saved enough money for a deposit on a new place." "How much longer do you think you'll need?" "Maybe another year," he said. "Sarah wants to stay home with Michael until he's walking, and we need time to save money and find the right house." Another year? What had started as a temporary arrangement was now being extended indefinitely with no consideration for my needs or preferences? "David, I love you and Sarah and Michael, but this arrangement isn't working for me. I need my space and my independence back."
"Mom, you're being selfish," he replied, his tone becoming defensive. "We're family, and families help each other. Sarah just had a baby, and you're worried about your convenience?" "It's not about convenience," I protested. "It's about my home and my life being completely taken over." "You have a big house that you don't even use," Sarah said, appearing from the hallway where she had apparently been listening to our conversation. "We're not asking for much, just a place to live while we get on our feet." "But you're not just living here," I said. "You've rearranged everything, taken over every room, and made it impossible for me to feel comfortable in my own home. If you're not happy with how we're living, maybe you should consider moving somewhere more suitable for a senior," Sarah said coldly. "This house is really too big for one person anyway." The suggestion hit me like a slap. They weren't just planning to stay in my house indefinitely. They were planning to push me out of it entirely. That night, I lay in my bed listening to the baby crying, Sarah complaining, and David trying to calm everyone down. And I realized that I had lost control of my own life. I was a prisoner in my own home, and my son and daughter-in-law were the wardens. But I was about to discover that the situation could get even worse.
6 months after David and Sarah moved into my house with baby Michael, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to ask them to leave, and if they refused, I would take legal action to reclaim my home and my life. The decision came to me during a particularly difficult week, when Sarah had been especially demanding and critical about my presence in my own house. "Rose, could you please not use the kitchen during Michael's feeding times?" she had said. "The noise of the coffee maker disturbs his concentration. Could you park somewhere else today? My mom is coming to visit and she shouldn't have to walk far. Would it be possible for you to stay out of the living room this afternoon? I'm having some friends over and it would be awkward to explain why you're here." Each request was presented as reasonable and temporary, but together they added up to me being systematically excluded from every area of my own home. I was being treated like an unwelcome boarder rather than the homeowner. The final straw came when I overheard a phone conversation between Sarah and her mother about their living situation. "We're so lucky that Rose is letting us stay here," Sarah was saying. "The house is perfect for Michael, and Rose barely uses most of the space anyway." "How long do you think you'll stay?" her mother asked. "Probably indefinitely," Sarah replied. "Rose is getting older, and she really shouldn't be living alone in such a big house. We're actually doing her a favor by being here to help her." "What if she wants you to move out?" her mother asked. "She won't," Sarah said confidently. "She loves Michael too much to ask us to leave. And besides, where would we go? We can't afford our own place right now." The conversation revealed that they had no intention of ever leaving voluntarily. They had convinced themselves that they were doing me a favor by taking over my house, and they were planning to stay until I either died or moved to a nursing home. That evening, I asked David to sit down with me for a serious conversation. "David, I need you and Sarah to start looking for your own place," I said directly. "This arrangement isn't working for me anymore. Mom, we've talked about this. We can't afford to move right now, and Sarah needs stability while she's caring for Michael." "Then you need to make it work financially," I said. "Get a second job, ask Sarah's parents for help, apply for assistance programs, whatever it takes, but you can't stay here indefinitely." "Why are you being so unreasonable?" he asked. "We're not hurting anything by being here." "I've taken over my entire house," I said. "You can't use my own kitchen, living room, or garage.
I can't have friends over or follow my own routine. I feel like a stranger in my own home." "You're exaggerating," Sarah said, joining the conversation with Michael in her arms. "We made some adjustments to accommodate a baby. That's normal when families live together." "But this isn't your house," I said firmly. "This is my house, and I want my space back." "Fine," David said, his tone becoming angry. "If that's how you feel, we'll start looking for somewhere else to live. But don't expect us to move out immediately. It's going to take time to find a place and save money for deposits." "How much time?" 6 months, maybe a year," Sarah said. "We can't just uproot Michael without proper planning." Another year? They were asking for another year of my life? Another year of being displaced in my own home? Another year of having no privacy or independence? "That's too long," I said. "I'll give you 3 months to find somewhere else to live." 3 months? Sarah exclaimed. "That's impossible. We have a baby, we don't have savings for deposits, and the rental market is terrible right now." "Then you should have thought about that before you moved in here without a clear plan for moving out." The argument that followed was intense and painful. David accused me of being selfish and heartless. Sarah cried and talked about how stressful it would be to move with a baby. They both suggested that I was being unreasonable and that most grandmothers would be happy to have their families living with them. But I held firm. 3 months was generous, and I wasn't going to negotiate further. "If you're not out in 3 months, I'll start eviction proceedings," I said, surprising myself with my resolve. "You would evict your own son?" David asked, looking shocked. "I would evict anyone who was living in my house without my permission,"
I replied. The next 3 months were the most tense and uncomfortable of my life. David and Sarah made minimal effort to look for alternative housing, instead hoping that I would change my mind or that they could wear me down with guilt and manipulation. They began bringing Michael to me when he was crying, saying things like, "Don't you want to spend time with your grandson before we have to move away?" They talked constantly about how difficult it would be to find affordable housing, how stressful moving would be for the baby, how unfair it was that I was prioritizing my comfort over their family's stability. "Most grandmothers would do anything to help their children," Sarah said during one particularly manipulative conversation. "I guess you're just not that kind of grandmother." But I had made my decision, and I wasn't backing down. I had spent 6 months being displaced in my own home, and I was ready to reclaim my space and my independence. When the 3-month deadline arrived and they were still living in my house with no concrete plans to leave, I did something I never thought I would do. I called a lawyer and began eviction proceedings against my own son. The legal process was heartbreaking but necessary. I had tried to help them, had sacrificed my comfort and independence for their benefit, and they had repaid my generosity by taking advantage of my kindness and refusing to respect my boundaries. The woman who had been displaced in her own home was about to take back control of her life, even if it meant losing her relationship with her son and grandson. The eviction process took 2 months and was the most painful experience of my 73 years. Having to legally force my own son and his family out of my house felt like a betrayal of everything I believed about family loyalty and unconditional love. But it was also necessary. David and Sarah had shown no intention of leaving voluntarily, and they had made it clear that they viewed my house as their permanent home, regardless of my wishes. "Mom, I can't believe you're actually going through with this," David said when he received the eviction notice. "You're choosing your house over your family." "I'm choosing my independence over being taken advantage of.
You've had 9 months to find alternative housing and you've made no effort to leave." "We've been looking," Sarah protested, "but everything is too expensive and we can't find anything suitable for a baby." "Then you should have thought about that before you moved in here without a plan for moving out," I said. The legal proceedings were straightforward but emotionally devastating. My lawyer explained that, as the homeowner, I had the right to evict tenants who were living in my house without a lease, even if they were family members. "Mrs. Martinez, you've been more than generous. 9 months of free housing, plus all the money you gave them before they moved in. You've done everything possible to help them." The judge agreed. David and Sarah were ordered to vacate my house within 30 days, and they were prohibited from returning without my permission. This is a civil matter. Mrs. Martinez has the right to control who lives in her home, and she has given the defendants ample time to find alternative housing. The day they moved out was heartbreaking. David barely spoke to me, loading their belongings into a moving truck with angry, jerky movements. Sarah cried and made dramatic statements about how I was destroying their family. "I hope you're happy," she said as she carried Michael to their car. "You're choosing an empty house over your grandson." "I'm choosing my right to live in my own home," I replied, though my heart was breaking as I watched them drive away. The house felt enormous and silent after they left. For the first time in 9 months, I could walk through my own living room without navigating around baby equipment. I could use my kitchen whenever I wanted, watch television at a comfortable volume, and sleep through the night without being awakened by a crying baby. But I also felt profoundly lonely and guilty. I missed Michael terribly, and I wondered if I had made the right choice in prioritizing my independence over maintaining a relationship with my grandson. The first few weeks were the hardest. I would wake up expecting to hear the baby crying or Sarah moving around the house, and the silence was almost overwhelming. I questioned my decision constantly, wondering if I should have been more patient and accommodating. But gradually, I began to appreciate having my space back. I could rearrange my furniture the way I liked it, cook the foods I enjoyed, and follow my own schedule without having to accommodate anyone else's needs or preferences. I also began to understand how much stress I had been living with during the 9 months they had been in my house. My sleep improved, my appetite returned, and I felt more relaxed and peaceful than I had in almost a year. 3 months after they moved out, I received a call from David asking if we could meet for coffee to discuss our relationship. "Mom, I've been thinking about what happened," he said when we met at a neutral location. "I realized that we probably overstayed our welcome, and I'm sorry about that." "Overstayed your welcome?" I repeated. "David, you moved into my house, took over every room, and refused to leave when I asked you to. That's not overstaying a welcome. That's taking advantage of someone's generosity." "We were just trying to save money and provide stability for Michael," he said. "At my expense. You saved money by living in my house rent-free. You provided stability for Michael by disrupting my stability. Everything you gained came at a cost to me, and you never acknowledged that." The conversation was difficult but necessary. David seemed to be beginning to understand that their behavior had been inappropriate, but he was still focused more on justifying their actions than on taking responsibility for the impact they had had on my life. "Can we try to rebuild our relationship?" he asked. "I miss you, and I want Michael to know his grandmother." "I want that too, but it has to be on different terms. You can't treat my generosity as entitlement, and you can't assume that being family gives you the right to disregard my boundaries." "What would those terms look like?" "Regular visits, but not moving back in. Mutual respect for each other's homes and decisions. and acknowledgement that what happened was wrong, not just a misunderstanding or a difference of opinion. David agreed to try, and over the following months, we slowly began to rebuild our relationship. The visits were awkward at first, but gradually we found a rhythm that worked for both of us. Sarah remained distant and resentful, clearly believing that I had been unreasonable and cruel, but she allowed David to bring Michael for visits, and I was grateful to be able to maintain a relationship with my grandson. A year after the eviction, I was living peacefully in my own home, enjoying my independence and my space. I had learned that it was possible to love your family while still maintaining boundaries, and that helping someone didn't require sacrificing your own well-being. The woman who had been displaced in her own home had reclaimed her space and her autonomy, and she was stronger and more confident than she had been before the crisis began.
2 years after evicting David and Sarah from my house, I was sitting in my living room, arranged exactly as I liked it, hosting a book club meeting with 6 other women from my neighborhood. The same living room that had once been filled with baby equipment and oversized furniture was now a peaceful space where I could entertain friends and pursue my own interests. "Rose, you seem so much more relaxed than you were a few years ago," observed my neighbor Patricia during the break in our discussion. "You're like a different person." She was right. The stress and tension I had carried during the 9 months of living with David's family had lifted completely, replaced by a sense of peace and contentment that I hadn't felt in years. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first year after they moved out had been difficult, filled with guilt, loneliness, and second-guessing my decision to evict them. But gradually, I had rebuilt my life around my own needs and preferences, and the result was a level of happiness and fulfillment I hadn't expected. I had joined the book club, started volunteering at the local animal shelter, and reconnected with old friends I had neglected during the chaotic period when my house was full of other people's drama. I was living my own life again, making my own choices and following my own schedule. The relationship with David had slowly improved over the 2 years since the eviction. He visited regularly with Michael, now a toddler, and we had developed a routine that worked for both of us. The visits were pleasant but bounded. They came for Sunday dinner once a month, and I babysat Michael occasionally when they needed childcare. "I understand now why you needed us to move out," David had told me during one of our conversations. "Living with Sarah's parents for 6 months after we left your house showed me how stressful it can be to have your space invaded, even by family." Sarah remained cool toward me, but she was civil during visits and allowed Michael to develop a relationship with me. I suspected she still believed I had been unreasonable, but she had apparently accepted that the living arrangement was never going to be restored. The most important change was internal. I had developed an unshakable confidence in my right to control my own living space and my own life. I no longer felt guilty about prioritizing my own needs, and I no longer apologized for setting boundaries with family members. "You taught me something important," my friend Margaret told me during one of our coffee dates. "I was letting my daughter take advantage of me financially, and watching you stand up to David gave me the courage to say no to her demands." I had become an informal advisor to other elderly people in my neighborhood who were dealing with adult children who had boundary issues. My experience with David and Sarah had taught me that family relationships required mutual respect and consideration, and that love didn't mean accepting unlimited demands or sacrifices. The financial recovery had been easier than I expected. Without David and Sarah's expenses, my household costs had dropped significantly, and I was able to rebuild the savings I had depleted helping them over the years. I was actually in better financial shape than I had been before they moved in. More importantly, I had learned to protect my resources from future exploitation. I worked with a financial advisor to set up safeguards that would prevent anyone from pressuring me into large financial gifts or loans. and I had updated my will to ensure that my assets would be protected regardless of family pressure. The house felt like home again. I had redecorated the rooms that had been taken over by David's family, replacing furniture that had been damaged and creating spaces that reflected my own taste and preferences. Every room told the story of my life rather than accommodating someone else's needs. I had also made the house more secure and private. I installed a new security system, changed all the locks, and made it clear to David that visits required advance notice and my permission. I would never again allow anyone to move into my home without a clear agreement about expectations and timeline. The most unexpected development was romantic. I had met Frank, a 75-year-old widower, at the animal shelter where we both volunteered. Our relationship had developed slowly, built on shared interests and mutual respect for each other's independence. "I love that you have your own life and your own space," Frank told me during one of our dates. "I'm not looking for someone to take care of me or someone I need to take care of. I'm looking for a companion who enjoys her own company as much as she enjoys mine." Our relationship was everything my marriage to Miguel had been, but with the wisdom and perspective that came from decades of life experience. We supported each other's independence while enjoying our time together, and neither of us had any interest in merging households or compromising our autonomy. The relationship with Michael had become one of the greatest joys of my life. Now 3 years old, he was a delightful child who loved spending time with his grandmother. Our relationship was uncomplicated by the tensions between his parents and me, and I was able to enjoy being a grandmother without the stress of having my boundaries violated. "Grandma Rose, can we make cookies?" he would ask during our visits, and we would spend hours in the kitchen creating treats and memories together. These moments reminded me that I had made the right choice in evicting his parents. By protecting my own well-being and establishing clear boundaries, I had been able to maintain healthy relationships with all of them that would last throughout their childhood and beyond. A year earlier, I had been invited to speak at a senior center about setting boundaries with adult children. My story had resonated with many elderly people who were struggling with similar issues, and I had become an advocate for seniors' rights to maintain control over their own homes and finances. "You don't owe your adult children unlimited access to your resources or your space," I told audiences. "Love doesn't mean accepting abuse or exploitation, even from family members." The speaking engagements had connected me with other elderly people who had faced similar challenges, and I had developed a network of friends who understood the importance of maintaining independence and dignity in later life. As I looked back on the journey from being displaced in my own home to reclaiming my space in my life, I was amazed by how much I had grown and changed. The crisis with David and Sarah had been painful, but it had also taught me valuable lessons about my own strength and the importance of self-advocacy. The woman who had once felt guilty about asking her son to move out of her home was now confident in her right to control her own living space. The grandmother who had been afraid of losing her relationship with her grandchildren had discovered that healthy boundaries actually strengthened family relationships. Most importantly, I had learned that it was never too late to start over, never too late to reclaim your independence, and never too late to build a life that reflected your own values and preferences rather than other people's expectations. The new beginning I had created was more peaceful and fulfilling than anything I had lost, and I was excited about whatever came next.
3 years after evicting David and Sarah from my house, I was shopping for groceries when I encountered Sarah in the produce section. It was the first time I had seen her without David present since the eviction, and the meeting was as awkward as I had expected it would be. She looked tired and stressed, pushing a cart with Michael, now 4 years old, and a baby I didn't recognize. When she saw me, her expression shifted from surprise to something that looked like guilt mixed with defiance. "Rose," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "How are you?" I'm well, thank you, I replied, smiling at Michael, who had recognized me and was waving enthusiastically from the cart. Grandma Rose, he called out, reaching toward me. Hello, sweetheart, I said, giving him a hug. Who's this little one? I asked, nodding toward the baby.
This is Emma, Sarah said reluctantly. She's 6 months old. I was surprised. David hadn't mentioned that they were expecting another baby, though our conversations were usually focused on Michael and didn't include much personal information about their lives. Congratulations, I said sincerely. She's beautiful. Thank you, Sarah replied, but her tone remained cool and distant. We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment, both of us aware of the unresolved tensions between us, but uncertain how to address them in a grocery store encounter. How are you and David doing? I asked, trying to make conversation. We're fine, she said quickly. Busy with 2 kids, but we're managing. Are you still living with your parents? I asked, remembering that they had moved in with Sarah's family after leaving my house. No, we found our own place about a year ago, she said. A small apartment, but it's ours. There was something in her tone that suggested the transition to independent living hadn't been easy, but I didn't press for details. I'm glad you found something that works for you, I said. It's not easy, she said, her composure slipping slightly. 2 kids and a 2-bedroom apartment, David working 2 jobs to make ends meet, but at least we have our privacy. The comment was clearly directed at me, a reminder of her belief that I had been unreasonable in asking them to leave my house. Privacy is important, I agreed. I'm glad you have your own space. Are you? She asked, her tone becoming more confrontational. Because it seems like you valued your privacy more than your family's well-being. I was taken aback by her directness, but I tried to respond calmly. I valued my right to live in my own home without being displaced by people who had no intention of leaving. We would have left eventually. We just needed more time to save money and find the right place. You had 9 months, and when I asked you to make concrete plans to move out, you told me you were planning to stay indefinitely.
We were overwhelmed with a new baby, she said defensively. We needed support, not eviction notices. I provided support for 9 months, I said. Free housing, free utilities, free groceries. But support has limits, and I reached mine. Michael was listening to our conversation with the wide-eyed attention of a child who sensed adult tension but didn't understand it. I didn't want to continue the argument in front of him. I should let you finish your shopping, I said, trying to end the encounter gracefully. Rose, Sarah said, her voice softening slightly, I want you to know that I don't hate you. I wish things could have been different. Different how? I asked. I wish you could have been more patient with us, she said. I wish you could have understood how hard it was for us to be new parents without much money or support. I did understand, I replied. That's why I let you stay as long as I did. But understanding your situation didn't mean I had to sacrifice my own well-being indefinitely. I guess we just have different ideas about what family means, she said. Maybe we do, I agreed. But I hope we can both agree that Michael deserves to have a relationship with his grandmother, regardless of our differences. Of course, she said quickly. David brings him to see you regularly, and I'm glad about that. He loves you. I love him too, I said, giving Michael another hug. And I'd love to get to know Emma as well when you're ready for that. Sarah looked surprised by my offer. You'd want to spend time with her? She's my granddaughter, I said simply. Of course I'd want to know her. I'll talk to David about that, she said, seeming genuinely moved by my interest in the baby. As we prepared to part ways, Sarah made one more comment that stayed with me long after our encounter ended. "I hope you know that we're doing okay," she said. "We found our own way, and we're building a good life for our kids. We didn't need your house to be successful." "I'm glad to hear that," I said sincerely. "I always hoped you would find your independence and build something that was yours." "We did," she said, lifting her chin with pride, "and we did it without anyone's help." The comment was meant to show me that they had succeeded despite my refusal to continue housing them, but it actually validated my decision to evict them. They had been capable of independence all along. They just hadn't been motivated to pursue it while they had free housing available. As I watched Sarah push her cart away, with Michael waving goodbye over his shoulder, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. I was glad to see that they were doing well and building their own life, but I was also reminded of how much stress and conflict could have been avoided if they had pursued independence from the beginning. The encounter reinforced my belief that I had made the right decision in evicting them. They were clearly capable of supporting themselves and their children. They just needed the motivation that came from not having unlimited access to someone else's resources. More importantly, the conversation had opened the possibility of a relationship with Emma, my granddaughter I had never met. Despite our differences, Sarah seemed willing to allow me to be part of both children's lives, which is all I had ever really wanted. The woman who had been accused of choosing her house over her family actually chose independence and boundaries that allow healthy family relationships to develop. The encounter reinforced my belief that I had made the right decision in evicting them. They were clearly capable of supporting themselves and their children. They just needed the motivation that came from not having unlimited access to someone else's resources. More importantly, the conversation had opened the possibility of a relationship with Emma, my granddaughter I had never met. Despite our differences, Sarah seemed willing to allow me to be part of both children's lives, which is all I had ever really wanted. 5 years after evicting David and Sarah from my house, I stood in my backyard, watching my grandson Michael, now 7 years old, and my granddaughter Emma, now 3, play on the swing set that I had installed for their visits. The same backyard that had once been filled with their parents' belongings during the chaotic 9 months they lived with me was now a peaceful space designed for family gatherings on my terms. The transformation had been complete and profound. The crisis that had nearly destroyed our family relationships ultimately led to healthier, more respectful connections based on mutual boundaries and appreciation rather than obligation and exploitation. David and Sarah visited regularly now, usually for Sunday dinners or holiday celebrations, but always with advance notice and clear expectations about the length and nature of the visit. They had learned to respect my space and my schedule, and I had learned to enjoy their company without feeling overwhelmed or invaded. "Mom, thank you for having us over today," David said, as he helped me clear the dishes after our Mother's Day dinner. "The kids love coming here, and I think we finally figured out how to make these visits work for everyone." He was right. The visits were pleasant and meaningful now because they were voluntary and bounded. I could enjoy being a grandmother and maintaining a relationship with my son without feeling like my independence was threatened. Sarah had also changed significantly over the 5 years since our grocery store encounter. The stress and defensiveness that had characterized her behavior during their time in my house had been replaced by a quiet confidence that came from successfully managing her own household and raising her children independently. "Rose, I owe you an apology," she had told me during a visit the previous year. "I was so focused on what I thought we needed that I didn't consider what we were taking from you. Living with my parents after we left your house helped me understand how difficult it must have been for you." The apology was meaningful, but more importantly, Sarah's behavior had changed. She was respectful of my home, helpful with meal preparation and cleanup, and genuinely appreciative of the time I spent with her children. My relationship with my grandchildren had become one of the greatest joys of my life. Michael was a bright, curious boy who loved spending time in my garden and helping me with cooking projects. Emma was a spirited toddler who brought energy and laughter to every visit. "Grandma Rose, can we plant more flowers?" Michael asked during one of our gardening sessions. "I want to make the yard even more beautiful." "Of course, sweetheart," I replied. "We can plant whatever you'd like." These moments reminded me daily that I had made the right choice in evicting their parents. By protecting my own well-being and establishing clear boundaries, I had been able to maintain healthy relationships with all of them that would last throughout the children's lives. I had also become an advocate for elderly people who were struggling with boundary issues with their adult children. My story had been featured in a local newspaper article about elder abuse and family exploitation, and I regularly spoke at senior centers about the importance of maintaining independence and setting limits with family members. You don't owe your adult children unlimited access to your home, your money, or your peace of mind, I would tell audiences. Love doesn't mean accepting abuse or exploitation, even from family members. The speaking engagements had connected me with dozens of elderly people who were facing similar challenges, and I'd become an informal counselor for seniors who needed support in setting boundaries with demanding adult children. One woman, Dorothy, had been particularly grateful for my advice. Her son had been living in her house for 3 years, contributing nothing financially and treating her like a servant in her own home. "Your story gave me the courage to give him an ultimatum," she told me. "Either he starts paying rent and helping with household expenses, or he moves out." He chose to move out, and our relationship is actually better now that he's independent. These success stories reminded me that my experience, while painful, had served a purpose beyond my own growth and healing. I was helping other people recognize their worth and establish healthier relationships with their adult children. My relationship with Frank had also deepened over the 5 years since we met. We had maintained our separate homes and independent lives while building a partnership based on mutual respect and shared interests. At 78 and 80 respectively, we had found love and companionship without sacrificing the autonomy we had both worked hard to maintain. "You taught me that it's possible to love someone without losing yourself," Frank told me during our recent anniversary dinner. "Your strength in dealing with your family situation showed me what healthy boundaries look like." The financial security I had rebuilt after David and Sarah moved out had allowed me to be generous in ways that felt meaningful and sustainable. I contributed to charities that helped elderly people maintain their independence, funded scholarships for students studying gerontology, and provided financial support for programs that educated families about healthy aging relationships. The contrast with my previous financial relationship with David's family was stark. Instead of depleting my savings to enable their dependence, I was using my resources to help people achieve independence and self-sufficiency. The most meaningful recognition had come when I was invited to serve on the board of a nonprofit organization that provided advocacy and support services to elderly people who were being exploited by family members.
My experience with David and Sarah had given me insights into the dynamics of family financial abuse that were valuable in helping other seniors protect themselves. Your story illustrates that it's possible to maintain family relationships while still protecting yourself from exploitation, the organization's director told me. You show that setting boundaries doesn't mean cutting off family. It means creating healthier relationships. As I watched Michael and Emma play in my backyard that Mother's Day, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought me to this point. 5 years ago, I had been a woman who felt displaced and taken advantage of in her own home. Today, I was a confident advocate who had helped dozens of other elderly people reclaim their independence and dignity. The crisis with David and Sarah had been painful, but it had also been transformative. It had taught me that love without boundaries was not sustainable, that helping someone didn't require sacrificing my own well-being,
and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's dependence. The woman who had been locked out of her own house was now firmly in control of her own space and her own life. The grandmother who was afraid of losing her relationship with her grandchildren had discovered that healthy boundaries actually strengthened family relationships. Most importantly, I had learned that it was never too late to stand up for yourself, never too late to demand respect, and never too late to build relationships based on mutual consideration rather than one-sided sacrifice. The circle was complete, but it had led to a place of strength and wisdom that I never could have imagined when I was sleeping in my car in my own driveway. The woman who was made homeless in her own home had become a voice for other elderly people who deserved to live with dignity and respect. I had come full circle, but to a much better place than where I had started. As I write these final words, 7 years have passed since that humiliating night when I slept in my Honda Civic in the driveway of my own house because my son had locked me out. I am now 80 years old, and I can say with absolute certainty that standing up to David and Sarah and reclaiming my home was the most important decision I made in the final decades of my life. The Rose Martinez Foundation for Elder Independence, which I established 3 years ago, has now helped over 300 elderly people escape exploitative living situations and maintain their autonomy in their own homes. Our programs provide legal assistance, financial counseling, and emotional support to seniors who are being taken advantage of by family members who see their homes and resources as entitlements rather than gifts. My book, Locked Out: How I Reclaimed My Home and My Life, has become a guide for elderly people who are struggling with boundary issues with their adult children. I receive letters weekly from seniors who have found the courage to set limits with demanding family members, to protect their resources from exploitation, and to prioritize their own well-being without guilt. David and I have built a relationship that is healthier and more honest than it ever was before the crisis. He visits regularly with Michael and Emma, now 9 and 5, and our interactions are based on mutual respect rather than his expectation that I would sacrifice my comfort for his convenience. Mom, I realize now that we were taking advantage of your generosity. We convinced ourselves that we were helping you by living there, but we were really just avoiding the responsibility of supporting our own family. Sarah has also grown and changed over the years since they achieved independence. She works part-time as a dental hygienist while the children are in school, and she and David have built a stable life in their own apartment. More importantly, she has developed genuine appreciation for the boundaries that make our family relationships sustainable. I understand now why you needed us to leave. Living independently has been hard work, but it's also been empowering. We're better parents and better people because we learned to take care of ourselves. My grandchildren have become the light of my life, and our relationship is uncomplicated by the tensions that once existed between their parents and me. Michael is a thoughtful boy who loves helping me in the garden, and Emma is a spirited child who brings laughter and energy to every visit. Grandma Rose, I'm glad you have your own house, he told me recently. It's special that it's just yours and we get to visit you there. His words reminded me that children understand fairness and boundaries in ways that adults sometimes forget. He appreciated having a grandmother who was happy and independent rather than stressed and overwhelmed. Frank and I celebrated our 5th anniversary as companions last month. Our relationship continues to be a source of joy and partnership without either of us sacrificing the independence we both value. We have proven that love and companionship can flourish in later life when they are built on respect and mutual support rather than need or dependence. To every elderly person who is reading this and recognizing patterns from their own family relationships, I want you to know that you have the right to control your own living space,
your own resources, and your own daily routine. You are not obligated to house adult children who are capable of independence, and you are not required to sacrifice your comfort and peace of mind for anyone else's convenience. If family members are pressuring you to give up your home, your savings, or your autonomy, if they're making you feel guilty for wanting to maintain your independence, if they are treating your generosity as an entitlement rather than a gift, these are warning signs that your boundaries are being violated. You have the right to say no. You have the right to set limits. You have the right to prioritize your own well-being even when family members accuse you of being selfish or unreasonable. To every adult child who might be reading this, I want you to understand that your aging parents are still autonomous individuals with rights, preferences, and dignity that must be respected. They are not obligated to solve your housing problems, your financial difficulties, or your childcare needs. If you are struggling with independence, if you need help getting on your feet, if you are facing genuine hardship, there are legitimate ways to seek assistance that don't involve taking over your parents' homes or exploiting their generosity. There are also consequences for elder abuse that can include the permanent destruction of family relationships. The journey from sleeping in my car to becoming an advocate for elder independence has been the most meaningful chapter of my life. I have learned that trauma can be transformed into purpose, that standing up for yourself can strengthen rather than weaken family relationships, and that it is possible to love someone while still maintaining boundaries that protect your own well-being. I have also learned that helping others achieve independence is more valuable than enabling their dependence, that respect is more important than compliance, and that healthy relationships require mutual consideration rather than one-sided sacrifice. The car where I slept for 3 nights became a symbol of how far family members will go to avoid taking responsibility for their own lives. The house I reclaimed became a symbol of the importance of maintaining control of your own space and your own choices. If my story has inspired you to examine your own family relationships, to set boundaries where they're needed, or to seek help if you're being exploited, then the humiliation and pain I experienced has served a purpose beyond my own growth and healing. Your home is your sanctuary, and no one has the right to take it from you or make you uncomfortable in your own space. Your resources are yours to control, and you are not obligated to fund other people's lifestyle choices or poor decisions. Your independence matters. Your comfort matters. Your right to live your own life on your own terms matters. And it is never too late to stand up for those rights, even when the people violating them are your own family members. The woman who was once locked out of her own house is now sleeping in her own bed, surrounded by people who respect her boundaries and appreciate her generosity without taking advantage of it. The grandmother who was afraid of losing her family discovered that healthy boundaries actually strengthened her relationships with her children and grandchildren. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing that elderly people deserve dignity, respect, and the right to control their own lives. And thank you for understanding that love should enhance your life, not control it. Now go protect your independence, set your boundaries, and remember that you are never too old to stand up for yourself and never too vulnerable to demand the respect you deserve. You have the right to live in your own home on your own terms. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.